Acts, chapter 12. Book of Acts, chapter 12. We'll read the first 5 verses. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, that is Peter, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church of God unto God for him. This, of course, is the record of Peter's imprisonment, and more importantly, the reaction of the Jerusalem church to that. The account opens with Herod Agrippa persecuting the church. So the Jerusalem church is facing strong opposition. One of the results of this was the arrest and the imprisonment of Peter. In verse 4, Peter is apprehended. He is arrested. In verse 5, we read, Peter, therefore, was kept in prison. And what comes next will be the focus of the message. But, it's a difference-making conjunction, conveying the idea of nevertheless or however. So Peter was kept in prison, but. The word but follows a negative. The negative being Peter, therefore, was kept in prison. And it is used to introduce a positive. That being, prayer was made without ceasing of the church of God, or of the church unto God for him. So, over here, Peter is in prison. But over here, we see that prayer was made. Prayer was made. That means prayer came into being. So over here, you have Herod. But over here, you have the church. And what are they doing? They are praying. Over here is the activity of fierce. But over here is the activity of the church praying. So again, Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. So what we see here is a people reacting and responding to a situation. And they are reacting and they are responding with prayer. So that's our subject, the reaction of prayer. The reaction of prayer. Peter was kept in prison. The reaction and the response of the church, but prayer was made. Prayer came into being, and this without ceasing. So let's consider first of all the circumstances. The circumstances that are responded to with prayer are recorded in verses 1 through 4. We see Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex, to torment, to trouble, to distress, to cause injury, to do evil to certain of the church. So he had a target. And then in verse 2, we see that he had already killed James, the brother of John, one of the inner circle. So the Jerusalem church was experiencing great sorrow, great heartache, and loss. And no doubt they were feeling anger as well. And without a doubt, it was a time when there was an array of emotions. Emotions were running high. Herod, being very politically astute, when he saw that the killing of James pleased the Jews that were in Jerusalem, he determined, well, I'm going to kill Peter also. The fact that this murder pleased the Jews revealed that it was a time of widespread hatred toward the church at Jerusalem. In verse 4, Peter is arrested, cast into prison. 16 soldiers were assigned to guard Peter, to make sure that he does not escape. This was a very troublesome, very disturbing time. A time of difficulty, a time of distress. It was a very threatening and dangerous time. And without a doubt, it was a time of uncertainty. What's going to happen to Peter? It's a time of fear. They were under attack. And it was a time of seeming impossibility. What can we do? So let's look at the reaction of the church. But prayer was made without ceasing of the church. So again, over here is a powerful king. And he has murderous designs and intentions. And the response of the church was prayer. Over here you have the murder of one of God's saints, a precious member of the Lord's church. But over here, the church is praying. Over here you have the hatred of a bloodthirsty world. But over here is a praying people. Over here, a child of God has been arrested. He's put in prison. He's under heavy guard. But over here is a people, and they are praying. Over here you have the threat of more murder. But again, over here, a people praying. When we look at these people praying, it's not a people with feeble desires, listless effort, lazy attitudes, nor is it a people merely going through the motions of prayer. But it's a people praying without ceasing. That is, they are praying with vigor and energy and zeal They are praying with passion. They are praying with determination. They are praying with diligence. Again, Peter kept in prison. But prayer was made without ceasing of the church. So their response to the situation is prayer was made. They did not picket the jail. They did not arrange a protest march. Nor did they write letters to the Sanhedrin. Their response was prayer was made. That's their response. They were heavily burdened. They are grief-stricken. One of their own has been killed. They are heartsick. And their impulse was to pray. That's what they did. I am sure, again, that there were a wide array of emotions. I'm sure there was some discouragement. I am sure that there was plenty of anger. And there was bitterness. And they dealt with this through prayer. That's how you deal with those things. Through prayer. There was no doubt was a profound sorrow. One of their own has been killed. Another of their own is about to be killed. So there's sorrow. There was a sense of loss. James has been killed. Their response, prayer, was made. And if I looked out on the horizon, there was more threats. And their response, prayer, was made. So in the midst of terrible circumstances, at the house of Mary, we read verse 12, many were gathered together. Not to form a planning committee. That's what folks would do today. They were not gathered together to put together a list of contacts that might be able to help with the situation. They were gathered together to pray. And we see them in verse 12. It says, many were gathered together praying. So again, what we see here, there may have been some discouragement. But what we see here is not a discouraged people who have thrown up their hands in despair, but a people gathered together praying. They gathered together for the purpose of praying. That's why they gathered, to pray. And they are praying, and they are together praying. That is, they at one and the same time, in the same place, and all at once, were praying. They were jointly praying. They were banded together praying. They were in harmony. They were in agreement praying. Again, over here is murder. And Peter is kept in prison. But over here is a people banded together praying. Verse 5 again, Peter kept in prison. But prayer was made without ceasing. Praying was the business at hand. That's why they were gathered together. So in the midst of apparent doom, in the midst of gloom, they prayed. And they did so without ceasing. Again, over here, Peter is kept in prison. But over here is a people gathered together, praying with fervency, with passion, with energy. We need to see them praying. See them together praying. They prayed, and then they prayed some more. And then they prayed some more. They prayed without ceasing. Again, over here is what appears to be a tragedy. But over here is a people gathered together, praying without ceasing. That is, on and on praying. They were moved to pray. They were compelled to pray. Whatever else was going on didn't really matter. Whatever else was going on, they felt a need to pray. Oh, how we ought to feel a need to pray. But we live in a time when people feel more of a need to complain than to pray. We need to feel a need to pray. And to do so without ceasing, without stopping. So let's consider, we see the circumstances. We see their reaction to the circumstances. Let's look at the gathering and the focal point of their activity. Again, verse 5, Peter is kept in prison, but prayer. Okay, that speaks of the activity at this time was made. That is, it came into being, and this was without ceasing of the church. That describes the people who are praying. And then you have that preposition unto. The direction of the activity. The direction of the activity is unto God. He's the one being addressed. For Him, that's Peter, he's the petition of the prayer. He's the one they are praying for. So there they are together unto God. Unto God. I believe those two words, unto God, are the two most important words in the verse. You say, well, the praying's pretty important. Yes, it is. But there's no praying without unto God. Unto God. The most two important words in the verse. Without those two words, the prayer, the whole activity, is without meaning. So what we have here is a gathering in the house of Mary. It is a gathering unto God. He's the focal point. Unto God. So there was an awareness of God. In the midst of these circumstances, there was an awareness of God. Verse 12, they were gathered together praying and this unto God. They were gathered unto God, praying. That means they were drawn to God, and they prayed. Their circumstances drew them to God and caused them to pray. Prayer was made unto God. They were looking to God. They were not looking at the circumstances. Their focal point was God, unto God. They were praying unto God. That means these people had gathered together and they had each taken their proper place before God. And they began to pray. They, no doubt, realized their own weakness. When you truly realize your own weakness, you will pray. They realized their own ignorance, and they realized their own need. So they gathered unto God, and they prayed. They had laid self-will to the side, and realizing His sovereignty, His greatness, His authority, His power, His ownership, they took a place of surrender before Him. You'll never pray until you do that. And there they are before God. And prayer was made unto God. They believed God. They trusted God. And they were praying. There was a personal belief. There was the assurance and conviction in the fact that He is a living God. He's an able God. He's a righteous, gracious, merciful God. A faithful God. A loving and caring and sustaining God. An always on time God. So they prayed unto God. Prayer was made unto God. That means they sought God. In the midst of these circumstances, they sought God. That was their response. I don't believe that was their last resort. That was their response. They sought God. They sought His power. They sought His help. They're seeking His intervention. They're seeking for a manifestation of God. And prayer was made unto God. That is, there was communion with God. There was fellowship. There was contact with God. People gathered together and they are in contact with God. Prayer was made without ceasing unto God of the church. Of the church. That's the people praying. It is a people who had faith in God. And they are approaching God. And they are doing so with much assurance and confidence in God's authority, in God's love, in His sustenance, in His care, in His instruction, in His consolation, in His power. To what extent is our life characterized by a faith that propels us to pray? Faith in God propelled them to pray. Now, many would say that Peter's situation is what compelled them to pray. No, I don't think so. They're praying for Peter, but it was faith in God that moved them to pray. Prayer was made without ceasing unto God of the church. Here is a people who knew God. They knew God. They knew that their sufficiency was in God. Knowing that, they talked to God. They talked to Him. When we truly realize that our sufficiency is in God, we'll talk to Him. We'll talk to Him. They knew the one who knew exactly where Peter was located in that prison. All they know is Peter has been arrested and he's in jail. But they knew the one who knew exactly where he was in that prison. So they talked to him. They knew the one who knew Peter's exact circumstances. They knew the one who knew exactly what Peter was going through, what he was experiencing, what he was feeling. So they talked to him. Makes sense? They knew the one who had the heart of Herod in his hands and could turn it whithersoever he would. So they just talked to him. They knew the one who's the controller and sustainer of all. They knew the one who's greater than the king. They knew the one who's greater than the king's army. The one who is greater than the prison walls, and greater than the chains, and greater than the iron gates. So they talked to him. Makes sense? If you know all those things, who else are you going to talk to? They knew the one who could bypass top security. They knew the one who did not need to check in at the front gate. They knew the one who did not have to be cleared by the warden. The one who could just show up anywhere in that prison. So they talked to him. They knew the one who was greater than that prison, greater than the iron gates. So they talked to him. I think sometimes we forget who we know. Who we know. There's no need to talk to everybody else. If you know who you know, talk to him. Save yourself a lot of time. Save yourself a lot of trouble. So there they are, praying unto God without ceasing. I believe they were doing what was normal for them to do. It's not the normality in man, but it ought to be the normality of God's people. We're going to pray. Oh, for it to be our natural response to pray. We read in, I believe it's Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 4. Nehemiah, it says, so I prayed. That was his response. So I prayed. Very simple. So I prayed. That ought to be our response. So there they are, gathered together unto God. God's the gathering point. God's the gathering point. Gathered together unto God, praying. So they are, by praying, that means they are casting themselves upon Him. They are laying all before Him. That's what praying is. We see them there gathered together unto God. They're praying. They're leaning upon Him. They're drawing from Him. They have turned their eyes to Him. He's the focus. They turn from the problem at hand, Peter in prison, to the God who can solve the problem. You got two things. You have a problem. You have the God who can solve the problem. What are you going to focus on? What are you going to focus on? Well, we know what most people focus on. We're going to focus on the problem. But doesn't it make more sense to focus upon the one who has the solution to the problem? So that's what they did. They talked to God. They turned from themselves unto God. They didn't have the answer. They didn't know how to free Peter from that prison. They turned from themselves unto God. And there they are, banded together unto God. Banded together unto God to pray for Peter. To pray for Peter. Peter's in prison. He's basically on death row. But gathered at the house of Mary were people. Banded together unto God, praying for him. That is, they have assembled together to commit Peter's case into God's hands. They're not there to discuss Peter's case. They are there to commit Peter's case into the hands of God. They are not there to give their opinions on Peter's case and to come up with ideas. They are there to commit Peter's case into God's hands. And there they are, pleading with the Lord on behalf of Peter. Their hearts are heavy. Their hearts are burdened. They have a love and they have a concern for Peter. And with great passion and energy, they're talking to God about Peter. About Peter and his circumstances. Peter was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. What they're doing is they're finding grace to help in time of need. Hebrews 4:16. So in closing, over here you have the unknown. You have uncertainty. But over here is a people who know and are absolutely certain of God. They're not certain about Peter, but they are absolutely certain about God. So they're talking to him. Over here is a powerful and wicked king, bent on destroying the Lord's church. But over here is a people meeting with the one who is the creator and the sustainer of all. They're meeting with the one who manages and directs and guides and governs all the affairs of the universe. They're meeting with the one who can. Over here, the hateful intent of a powerful enemy. But over here, a people meeting with the one who loves them and cares for them. Yes, over here is Herod, and he hates us. But over here is a God who loves us. We're going to talk to him. So read verse 5. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. In those words, the Jerusalem church is an example to us, individually and collectively as a church. To what extent is our life characterized by prayer? It ought to be our reaction all the time. I'm going to pray. I'm going to talk to God. Even if you don't feel you need anything. Who better to talk to? What role does prayer have in our lives? Is it a central and major part of our life? Again, I think sometimes we forget who we know. Who we know. We need to be a people of prayer. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us in verse of song, let's all stand.